14th of November, in the Horsefly district of the Caribou region of interior British Columbia, a 51-year-old district forest warden named Gerald walked out of the forest in the middle of a rotation, left his district truck at the lower gate with the keys still in it, and never went back into that country again. He had worked those woods for 20 years, but he gave no notice and filed no final report. He quit a career at the exact midpoint of a working week, on foot, and the only account of why is the one left behind without meaning to. The account is a green field logbook, filled in his small square handwriting, and a manila folder of trail camera stills. Both sat in a drawer at a relative's house for years before anyone read them through. This story is drawn entirely from those two documents and from the handful of people in that valley who would say anything at all about that autumn in question.
The outcome is not in doubt. Gerald Pruitt left the woods and did not return, and within a few years he was dead, and the valley he worked was quietly reassigned and the matter closed the way small, strange matters in remote places are always allowed to close. What is in doubt is the thing the logbook was building toward on its last written page, a number, a count. The record makes clear that a man who had spent his whole life reading death in that country was destroyed, at the very end, not by anything that killed him, but by something he counted. This is the account of what he was counting in his own words, exactly as he set it down. I had the Horsefly district and the country east of it for the better part of 20 years. I knew every drainage in it, every trapline cabin, every ranch edge where the game came down to cross. I want to be clear about that from the start, because everything that happened only matters if you understand that I was not a man who got spooked. I had pulled apart bear kills and wolf kills and winter kill. I had found things in that country that would turn most people around at the trailhead, and I logged them and I went home and I slept fine. Death in the woods has a grammar to it. Everything that kills leaves a signature, and I could read all of them. That was the job. I was good at it. The valley I worked runs northeast off the main road, a long trough of spruce and lodgepole and second-growth fir, with a river at the bottom and old cut blocks grown back in on the slopes. There are 3 trapline cabins up the far end, and a couple of ranches at the low end where the land opens up. Between them is nothing but bush and logging road, and the kind of quiet that a city person finds beautiful for about an hour and then cannot stand. The nearest town of any size is better than an hour out on gravel. In the whole district, I might see 4 other human beings in a week, and 2 of them would be the same trapper twice. I say all this so you understand the baseline. I knew what normal was up there. Normal had a shape, and I had lived inside that shape for 20 years. That autumn, the shape started to go wrong, and for a long time, I could not have told you how. The first one I found in the second week of October. It was a wild boar, a big one, a mature sow, dead in the grass at the edge of a cut block about a mile up from the lower ranch. The feral pigs had been in that country a few years by then, come up from the south, and a dead one was not itself unusual. What was unusual was the state of it. There was not a mark of feeding on it. Not a bear, not a wolf, not a coyote, not a bird. Nothing had opened it. It was whole, lying on its side in the frost, and the only sign of violence on the whole animal was in the neck, which had been done in a single motion, cleanly, the way you would not think a thing that big could be done. I stood there a while with that. A boar that size does not die quiet. Something had killed it, and then walked away from 150 pounds of meat in a season when everything in that valley was laying on fat for the winter. Nothing does that. Nothing that has to live out there wastes a kill like that. So I did what I always did. I found the ordinary answer and I put the strange one down. Poacher, I told myself. Somebody had shot it and lost it in the dark, or gut shot it and it ran and dropped here and they never found it. It happens. I photographed it, I logged it, I noted that it had been dragged a short distance after death, and I let the dragging go because a poacher will move an animal. I did not let myself sit with the fact that it had been dragged to nowhere. It was not moved toward a road or a truck or a game trail. It had been moved off the open cut block and into the grass at the edge and left there, and that is not what a man does with an animal he means to take. I logged it and I drove out, and I did not think about it again for 11 days. That is in the book too. 11 days. The second one I found on the 11th day, and it was closer to the ranches, which should have told me something and did not. A calf this time, a fall calf from the lower place, half grown, dead in the willows along the creek maybe 300 yards up from the pasture fence. Same as the boar, whole. Not a mark of feeding on it, no gut pile, nothing opened, and the neck done in the one clean motion I was starting, though I would not admit it yet, to recognize. And it had been carried. That is the part I made myself not think about. A half-grown calf is not a small animal, and this one had been lifted clean over a 4-strand barbed wire fence without so much as a tuft of hair left on the top wire and set down in the willows on the far side, 300 yards from where it had been standing and left. I told the rancher a bear had likely taken it and been driven off before it could feed. And he took that because it was a thing a bear could be blamed for, and there was comfort in it. And I drove out again with the comfort I had given him sitting wrong in my own gut. Because I had lifted enough dead stock in my life to know what it takes to move a calf that far. And a bear does not carry a calf over a fence like a man carrying a sack. Nothing I knew did. The third one, I did not find myself. I heard about it. There's a trapper up the far end of the valley, an old boy named Osei who had run that line longer than I had worked the district. I met him at the co-op in town where he had come down for supplies, and he was not right. Osei was a man who had spent 50 winters alone in the bush and had the flat calm of it in him all the way through. That day he did not have it. He told me he had found a mule deer, a young buck, laid out in the middle of a clearing on his line. Laid out, he said, not fallen, laid out on its side with the legs together in the open where nothing kills a deer, because nothing gets a healthy young buck in the open. And nothing had eaten it. He had pulled his sets for that whole stretch of the line and come down early. A trapper does not come down early. That is money he is walking away from. And Osei was not a man who walked away from money. I asked him what he thought did it. He looked at me for a while and then he said he was not going to say because if he said it out loud, he would have to believe it. And he was too old to start believing things now. Then he bought his flour and his shells and he drove back up the valley and I stood in the parking lot of the co-op with the first real cold going down my back. Because Osei was the last man in that country I would have expected to be afraid. After that, I started hearing other things, the way you do once you're listening. A ranch hand at the lower place told me the cattle dogs would not work the top pasture anymore, would not go past the tree line at the high end, would sit down in the grass and shake, and no amount of pushing would move them. He thought maybe there was a cat working the edge, a cougar, and I let him think it, because it was a good enough answer and I did not have a better one to give him. And there was an old man who came into the co-op, a rancher's father, 90 if he was a day, who heard me and Osei that day and caught me on the way out. He said his own father had worked this valley when it was first cut and that there had been a season way back when the game went wrong. That is the phrase he used. The game went wrong. Animals turning up dead and not eaten, and the old people knowing enough to move their stock down out of the high country and keep the children close until it passed. I asked him what it was. He said his father would never name it, and that not naming it was how his father had stayed alive long enough to have him. Then he shuffled off to his son's truck, and that was the end of it. There was one more that came to me secondhand, and it was the one that took the last of my comfort. A road crew had been up the valley that autumn doing culvert work on the main logging road, and one of the young fellows on the crew, a kid from town, came and found me at the office because he did not know who else to tell. He said they had been packing up at dusk one evening, the light going, and one of the older men on the crew had gone quiet and told them all to get in the trucks. Right now, no fuss. And they had, because the older man did not scare and he was scared. And as they pulled out, the kid said he looked back and there was something standing at the tree line watching the road crew leave, standing upright, tall, taller than any man, dark against the dark timber, not moving, just watching them go. The older man would not talk about it after and told the kid to forget it, that it was a bear standing up, and the kid had come to me because he knew a bear standing up did not look like that, and did not stand that still, and did not stand that tall, and he wanted somebody with a title to tell him it was a bear. I told him it was probably a bear. I am not proud of that. I sent that kid back to town with the same flat lie I was telling myself because the truth was not a thing I could hand a 19-year-old across an office desk. None of that was evidence. I want to be honest about that. It was the texture of a place that knew something I did not know yet. But it got into me. I started driving the valley differently. I started carrying the rifle in the truck cab instead of the rack, which I had not done in years. I started noticing where the ravens were and were not, because the ravens always know first. And that autumn, there were stretches of that valley where the ravens simply were not, where the woods had gone quiet in a way I did not have a word for. And I started, without quite admitting it to myself, staying out of the high country in the last hour of light, the way the old man had said his father learned to. I was becoming one of the people I had spent 20 years quietly not believing. And the worst of it was that I could feel it happening and I could not make myself stop, because every instinct I had, every one of the animal instincts that keep a man alive in that country, was telling me the old people had been right. Then the kills came faster and I stopped being able to tell myself the poacher story. Through the end of October and into November, I logged 6 more, another boar, 2 more deer, a young bull elk, which stopped me cold because a healthy young elk is not a thing that dies easy. And this one had gone down the same way as the boar, one clean motion at the neck, and nothing had touched the meat. And they were not scattered the way natural kills are scattered. They kept coming back to the same handful of places. There was a clearing up near the head of the valley, an old grown-in landing from the logging days, and I found kills there 3 separate times over 3 weeks. The same spot, as if it were being used for something. And some of them were arranged. I did not want to write that word in the book, and for a while I did not. But there is no other word. A kill that falls where it dies lies the way gravity leaves it. All wrong angles, the way dead things lie. These were not like that. These were laid out, legs together, on their sides, facing more than once the same direction as though placed. The young elk in the landing had been set down with a care that made my hands cold to photograph. There was a night in there I have never written down, and I'm going to write it now. I had gone up to the head of the valley in the last week of October to pull a camera card, and the light went on me before I was done, the way it does that time of year, fast. The valley filling up with dark from the bottom like water filling a tank. I was maybe a quarter mile below the grown-in landing when I heard it, something moving through the timber above me, upslope, keeping pace with me in the dark. And it was big. I have listened to every animal that country holds move through the bush at night, and I know the sound each of them makes and the weight each of them carries, and this was none of them. It moved on 2 legs. I could hear the 2 beat of it, the pause and the fall of a thing that walks upright, and it was heavier than a man, much heavier, and it paced me down that whole quarter-mile to the truck without once coming into the open and without once making the mistake of stepping wrong. It knew the ground better than I did. When I got to the truck and put the lights on the tree line, there was nothing there. But the ravens were gone from that whole slope for a week after, and I did not go up to the landing alone in the last light again. I did not write Bigfoot in the book that night. I want you to understand how hard a man will work not to write that word. I wrote, large animal, bipedal, paralleled my route, and I let those cold, flat words stand in for the thing my whole body already knew. Because to write the real word was to join Osei and the old man at the co-op, and every person I had spent my career quietly filing under the heading of people who had let the bush get into their heads. I was not going to be one of them. I was going to be the man with the flat words and the good photographs. I held on to that for another 2 weeks. There was another kill in the first week of November that I have to tell you about because it was the one that started taking the flat words away from me. A cow moose, a full-grown cow, which is a very great deal of animal, more than half a ton of it, down in the black timber on the north side of the valley. A cow moose is not killed by anything in that country except a determined pack of wolves working her for a long time, or a man with a rifle. This one had no rifle wound and no wolf sign and had gone down, as near as I could read it, in one motion, the same clean motion at the neck as the boar and the calf and the deer, a thing I would have said was flatly impossible on an animal that size. And she had been rolled, half a ton of moose, rolled onto her side and squared up, legs drawn in a little natural opening in the timber, laid out the way the elk had been laid out in the landing, the way you would arrange a thing you were proud of. I sat on my heels next to that moose for the better part of an hour in the cold, and somewhere in that hour the flat words finally failed, and what was underneath them was the plain fact that a Sasquatch was working my valley and had been for longer than I had known, and was not doing any of this to eat. I went through every answer I had and I threw them all out one by one because that is the job, and I did it even though I did not want the answer that was left. Poachers, no. No poacher takes a dozen animals across 2 months and leaves every ounce of meat. There is no reason on earth to do it. The meat is the point. Nobody kills that much and walks away. Wolves, no. Wrong signature entirely, and wolves eat. A wolf kill is a scene of feeding, of competition, of the pack. These were solitary and clean and untouched. Bears, no. Same. A bear that kills, eats, or caches, to come back and eat later, buried under duff and dirt. These were not buried, and they were not being returned to and eaten. They were being returned to and added to. Disease, some die off, no. Too clean, too deliberate, too consistent in the manner of killing, and disease does not lay a body out in a clearing with its legs together. I sat in the cabin at the head of the valley one night in the middle of November with the logbook open and the map beside it, and I made myself look at the shape of it. And the shape of it was that something was killing animals in that valley, a lot of them, and not eating any of them and bringing them back to certain places and arranging them. And I could not make that be anything a normal animal does. Everything that kills out there kills to live. Whatever this was, it was not killing to live. And I did not know what else there was to kill for, and that not knowing was the worst thing I had felt in 20 years of that country. I set trail cameras, 4 of them, on the approaches to the grown-in landing where the kills kept coming back. And then I waited, and I did not sleep well, and the ravens stayed gone. It was the 3rd night that the camera at the west approach caught it. I have watched what is on that card more times than I will admit, and I'm not going to try to walk you through it frame by frame because there is a way of talking about these things that makes them small, and I do not want to make this small. I will tell you what I saw. A Bigfoot came through the frame at night in the infrared, walking upright on 2 legs, and it was carrying the boar. It was well over 7 feet, not an ape. That is the thing the pictures never get across and the thing I cannot stop seeing. The Bigfoot was closer to a man than to an ape, closer to the old idea of a man, heavy through the brow with a bony ridge over flat reflective eyes, a broad prominent nose, a wide flat face with no muzzle to it, nothing of the dog or the bear about the face at all. The hair on it was dark, a deep rust brown going to charcoal down the back and the arms, and where the skin showed at the face and the hands, it was a weathered gray-brown, like old wood. There was a torn notch out of the left ear, an old healed split, and that notch caught the infrared every time it turned its head, and I would come to know that notch the way you know a face. It had the boar under one arm, a full-grown boar, 150 pounds of animal, and the Sasquatch carried it the way you or I would carry a rolled coat, tucked and easy, no strain in it anywhere. The boar's snout hung at about the level of the Bigfoot's chest, and the whole animal, all 150 pounds of it, did not pull that arm down so much as an inch. If a full-grown man had stood in that frame beside the Bigfoot, he would have come up to about its sternum, and I know that because I stood a ranger of my own height at that camera site later, in daylight, and measured against where the head had been, and the number I got I did not put in the book either. That is the scale I keep coming back to, because it is the only way I know to make you feel it. And here's the part that broke the last of my rationalizing, the part I sat with in the cabin at 2 a.m, going back over the card again and again. It was not carrying the boar toward anything. It was walking away from the kill site, and it was not heading for a den, not heading for cover to feed, not heading anywhere that made sense for an animal that had just made a kill and wanted to eat it in peace. It was carrying the boar the way a man carries something he means to put somewhere. It had a destination in mind. It was taking it back. I knew then what the clearing was for. I want to tell you that the footage answered the question, and it did not. It made it worse. Because now I knew it was real, and I knew the Bigfoot was strong past any reason, and I knew none of that was the point. The point was that a Sasquatch that could take any animal in that valley, that could take me if it wanted, was taking only what it took, killing clean, eating nothing, and carrying the bodies back to certain places and laying them out. And I still did not know why. So I did the last thing I knew how to do, which was count. I took the logbook and I took the rancher's reports and Ussie's deer and the ranch hand's dogs and the sites where the cameras had triggered, and I mapped every kill I knew of and everyone I had good reason to believe in across the whole autumn. And I sat with the map and I saw the shape at last, and the shape was not random and it was not scattered. The kills returned to a small number of places, 3 mainly, with the grown-in landing at the center of them, and around those places the kills clustered and came back and came back. The number, when I had it all down, was more than I'm going to say here, because when I wrote it in the book, my own handwriting did not look like mine. It was dozens. Dozens of animals across one autumn in one valley, killed clean, none of them eaten, brought back and laid out in the same few places over and over. And I went to the landing in daylight with a rifle I knew was pointless, to see the central place with my own eyes, and I will not describe what was there in any detail because it does not need the detail, and because some of it I have never told anyone and I am not going to start now. I will only say this: it was not a feeding site. Nothing had fed there. It was a place where things had been brought and left and kept, not buried to come back and eat. Kept. and it had not been made that autumn. It was older than that autumn. It had been accumulating for a long time, quietly, 1.5 miles from a logging road where I had waved at ranch kids on quads not 2 months before. I stood in that older part of the record for a long time, the part that had been accumulating before I ever set a camera, and I made myself do the arithmetic I had been avoiding all autumn. I laid the dates from my logbook against the ages of what I could see had been brought to that place, the fresh and the old and the very old, and the arithmetic told me a thing I've not been able to put down since. The Bigfoot had not started this the autumn I noticed it. It had been doing this in my valley at the same few places for years. For most of the time, I had worked that district probably. All those years I'd been driving the logging roads and waving at the ranch kids and telling myself I knew every drainage and everything that moved in it. A Sasquatch had been out there past the tree line killing clean and carrying the bodies back and laying them out and adding to the count. And I had known nothing, and it had known me. It had watched me work my valley the whole time. I was certain of that standing at the landing. It had let me not see it for 20 years. That is when I understood it, and the understanding is the reason I am not out there anymore. The Bigfoot was not hunting. Hunting ends in eating. This did not end in eating. It never had. It was collecting. And the way the bodies were placed and returned to and added to, the way the count kept climbing in the same few places, season over season, year over year, longer than I had been watching, longer maybe than I had been in that district at all. The Sasquatch was not gathering food. It was keeping something, adding to something. The only thing in my whole life I have ever seen that lays out its kills in the same place and comes back to add more and never eats a bite of any of it is a man with a wall of antlers in his den. It was keeping score. It was doing it for the doing of it. And a Bigfoot had been doing it, patient and unhurried and unseen, in the middle of a valley full of people who thought they knew what lived up there. And it had chosen, for reasons I will never have, to let me be the one man who finally counted. I closed the book that day at the landing, and I drove the district truck out to the lower gate, and I left the keys in it, and I walked to the road, and I have not gone back into that country since, and I never will. The record ends there. Gerald Pruitt filed no final report. He requested no transfer and gave no statement. He simply did not return after that rotation, and the district office, after a decent interval, reassigned the valley and let the matter close the way small strange matters in remote places are always allowed to close. The logbook and the folder of stills passed to a relative and sat in a drawer for years before anyone read them through. Searchers who went up to the Gronin landing that next spring on a routine survey with no idea what they were walking into reported finding an unusual concentration of animal remains at the site, of varying ages, which they attributed in their paperwork to a natural predator kill site, because that is the box the form gives you and there was no other box to tick. The survey noted, without comment, that the older remains at the site appeared to have been deliberately positioned, and that the age range of the material was inconsistent with a single season of predation. Then it filed the observation under natural causes and moved on, because a government form has no line for the thing Gerald Pruitt spent his last autumn learning to read. The logbook, when his relative finally went through it, ends mid-page. The last full entry is the tally. The number Gerald would not say aloud and wrote in a hand that his own family did not recognize as his. After it, there is a single line, started and not finished, 3 words, and then nothing. The pen having lifted off the page. It has never come out of me. That is what it says. It has never come out of me. And then the writing stops, and the rest of the book is blank.
No agency has ever confirmed anything in Gerald Pruitt's account. The stills exist. The notch in the left ear is on one of them, catching the infrared exactly as he described it. What was on that card and what was in that clearing has never been explained. And the man who read death in that valley for 20 years decided at the very end that he had finally read something in it that he could not stand to keep reading. Real or fake, you decide.
This is a story I have carried the longest and told the fewest people, and I am telling it now because the ground it happened on is about to be torn open. The parcel behind my old place sold over the winter to a company that means to clear the back 40 this spring, right up the slope and into the tree line. And there is a tree up there they're going to take down without knowing what it is. It is only a tree to them. It is the most important tree in the world to me and to something else, and I cannot let the saws reach it without at least one other living person understanding what that tree meant and what waited under it, night after night in the worst winter of my life. So I'm going to tell it plainly, and you can make of it what you want. My name does not matter much to the story, but I will give it because I am tired of being careful. Colleen, I was 53 the winter this happened, widowed 2 years by then, living alone on 11 acres at the end of a dead-end road in the Kootenays in the mountain country of southeastern British Columbia, a good long way up a valley from the nearest town. My husband and I had bought the place to grow old on, and then he did not get to grow old, and I stayed because leaving felt like losing him twice. I'm not a nervous woman, and I'm not a fanciful one. I ran game cameras on the back trail because I liked knowing what moved through my woods, the deer and the bear and the lynx, and because after he died, the animals were company of a kind, proof that the world was still full even when my house was empty. The back trail ran up the slope from the clearing behind the house into the timber, and at the top of it, where the old logging cut met the standing forest, there was a big fir, older than the rest, wide as a table through the trunk. The one tree the loggers had left standing years before I ever came. I had a camera on that trail about halfway up, aimed at the game path. That camera is where it started. It was late November when I got the first picture I could not explain. Most of what the camera catches is deer, and I had learned to click through the deer fast. But that night there was one frame, near midnight, of a shape standing on the trail up near the top, near the fir, small and dark and upright, and I clicked past it before it registered, the way your eye slides past a thing it is not ready for. I went back. I looked at it a long time. It was small, no taller than my collarbone if it had stood next to me, dark all over, and it was standing on 2 legs, facing down the trail toward the house. I told myself it was a bear cub up on its hind legs, and I believed it for exactly one night, because the next night it was there again, the same time, the same spot, facing the same way, facing the house, facing me. A bear cub does not come back to the same square yard of ground at the same hour 2 nights running and stand there facing a house. I knew that even as I was trying not to know it. By the end of that first week, I had 7 pictures, 1 a night, all within the same half hour around midnight, all in the same place at the top of the trail near the fir. And in every one of them, the small, dark, upright shape was facing down toward the house. And I will tell you honestly what I felt, because it is the truth, and because it is the opposite of how the story ends. I was afraid. I thought I was being watched. I thought something had fixed on me, alone up there at the end of the road, and was working up its nerve or biding its time. I started locking doors I had never bothered to lock. I brought the outside lights on timers. I sat up some nights with my husband's rifle across my knees, watching the black square of the kitchen window, feeling the weight of the empty house around me, certain that whatever stood on that trail every night at midnight wanted in. That went on the better part of 2 weeks, the fear of it, before I did the thing I should have done at the start, which was to walk up the trail in daylight and look at the ground. I went up on a still gray morning with the snow a few inches deep and fresh, good tracking snow, and I read the story the tracks told, and the story was not the one I had been telling myself in the dark. The tracks were small, long and narrow, and clearly not a bear, 5 toes, a human shape to them, but wrong in the proportion, too long in the heel, and small, the size a child's foot might make if a child had feet built for the mountains. And they did not come down the trail toward the house. That was the thing that turned me all the way around, standing there in the cold with my breath going up in front of me. In all those nights of pictures, the small dark shape facing my house, it had never once come down the trail. The tracks circled the big fir, around and around, dozens of loops, packed into the snow so hard and so many times that the ground under the tree was worn to a smooth trodden ring, the way cattle wear a path around a feed bunk. It had not been coming toward me at all. It had been up there the whole time, going around and around that one tree, and only turning to face down the trail toward the light of the house in between. I stood in that trodden ring under the fir for a long time, and something in my chest turned over from fear into something else, something I did not have the shape of yet. Because you do not wear a ring in the snow around a tree by accident. You do not come back to one exact place night after night and circle it unless that place means something. This was not an animal wandering through. This was a mind, a small mind, fixed on one spot, coming back to it and back to it, waiting. And I understood, standing there, that it was waiting for something. I just did not yet understand what. I stopped locking the doors after that. I cannot fully explain why, except that the tracks had told me it was not interested in the house, had never been interested in the house, and the fear went out of me the way air goes out of a tire, slow and then all at once. What came in to replace it was closer to grief, and I did not know yet why grief, only that it fit. I did the thing you are not supposed to do. I started leaving food, not at the house, at the tree. I would go up in the last light of the afternoon before it came and leave things at the base of the fir, at the edge of the worn ring. Apples first, then a heel of bread, then, when I understood it a little better, things with more to them, eggs, a piece of meat, a handful of the sunflower seed I put out for the birds. I never once saw it take anything. It would not come while I was there, and if I sat too long up the trail waiting, it would not come at all, and the food would be there in the morning untouched. But if I left before dark and stayed at the house, the food would be gone by first light, and the ring around the tree would be freshly worn, and there would be one new picture on the camera, midnight, the small dark shape facing the house. This went on into December and the deep part of the winter, and I will not pretend it was more than it was. There was no taming, no moment where it came and ate from my hand. It was slower and stranger and quieter than that. But it changed by inches over weeks, and I want to give you the inches because the inches are the whole of it. The first change was that it let me be up the trail at dusk, not close. But where before it would not come within sight of me at all, there came an evening when I sat on a stump, a good stone's throw down the slope from the fir in the last gray light, and it came out of the timber above the tree and stood at the edge of the ring and looked at me and did not leave. I could see it properly for the first time then, not in the flat wash of the infrared, but in real failing daylight. And I understood what it was, and understanding it did not make it any less impossible. It was a young Sasquatch, There is no other honest word, and I have stopped reaching for a softer one. A Bigfoot, a child of one, the thing every logger and trapper in this country has a story about from their grandfather. And nobody says out loud sober, it was built the way the grown ones in the old stories are built. The heavy, bony brow over flat, dark eyes, the broad, prominent nose, the wide, flat, nearly human face with no muzzle to it, the dark hair going toward charcoal, but all of it small. A young one, no taller than my collarbone, thin under the hair in a way that frightened me, its ribs showing when it turned. There was nothing fierce in it. It stood at the edge of the ring in the dusk and looked down the slope at me with those flat, dark eyes, and then it turned and went around the tree, once, slowly, the way it always did, and I understood that the circling was not restlessness, it was something more like devotion. I want to stop here and say the plain thing, because I spent that whole winter not saying it, and it cost me. I had a young Bigfoot living at the top of my trail. Not a legend, not a blurry shape in somebody else's story, but a living, breathing, starving young Sasquatch that I was leaving eggs for at the foot of a fir tree. And the strangeness of that was so total that for weeks my mind kept trying to slide off it. Kept trying to make it a bear or a lost person or a trick of the camera, anything but the true thing. Because the true thing did not fit in the world I had agreed to live in. But it was the true thing. I made myself hold on to it. There was a young Sasquatch at the top of my trail, and it was grieving, and it was going to die up there if somebody did not do something, and the only somebody in the world who knew was me. The second change was the distance. Over the next 2 weeks, evening by evening, I was able to sit a little closer. I did not push it. I let the little Sasquatch set the terms, the way you do with anything wild and hurt, and the terms it set were slow and exact. One evening I could sit at the bottom of the slope, a few evenings later halfway up. By the middle of December, there was an evening I sat on the log not 30 feet below the fir, close enough to hear it breathing, close enough to see the individual hairs of it stir when the wind came down off the high country, and it let me. It stood in the ring and circled the tree and let me be that close. And once, only once, it stopped its circling and looked at me for a long time. And then it did a thing I've never told anyone. It reached out one long arm and set its hand flat against the trunk of the fir, the way you would put your hand on a thing to feel that it is still there. And it held its hand there, and it looked at me, and I understood it was showing me. This is the place. This is where she was. Do you see? And I said out loud into the cold the first words I had spoken to it. I said, I see it. I see the place. And it could not have understood the words, but it understood that I had answered, and it went back to circling, and I went down the trail with my whole chest aching in a way it had not ached since the winter my husband died. I started spending the evenings up there, not every night, but most. I would take a thermos and sit on the log in the dark after I left the food, in the deep cold, and I would talk to it, low, about nothing, about my husband and the place and the weather coming, the way you talk to something to let it know you are there and you're not going anywhere. It never came close enough to touch, and I never tried to make it. But it stopped circling while I talked. It would come to the edge of the ring and lower itself down and sit. This small, starving Bigfoot child, and it would listen to my voice in the dark. And for as long as I talked, it did not go around the tree, and I came to understand that my voice was the only thing in that whole winter that could hold it still, could pull it even a little out of the loop it was caught in. And I could not be there every hour of every night, and every hour I was not there, it went back around the tree, waiting. And I could not save it by talking, and I knew it, and I went up anyway. The third change was the sound. There came a night, well into December, bitter cold, when I heard it from the house. Low and long and rising and falling, a sound with too much shape in it to be wind and too much sorrow in it to be anything but what it was. It came down the slope from the fir, and I stood at the black kitchen window I had once watched in terror, and I listened to a child that was not a human child grieving under a tree in the dark, and I finally understood what it was waiting for. It was waiting for its mother. I pieced it together slowly over those weeks, the way you piece together anything you were not there to see. Something had happened up in that high country, up above my tree line in the autumn. I never knew what. A fall, a hunter, the cold, the thing on the Warden's camera for all I know. That whole country strung together by valleys. Something had taken the mother up near that fir, which must have been the last place the little one had been with her. The last place it had seen her, and the little one had done the only thing its grief knew how to do. It had gone back to that place, and it had waited. Night after night, it came back to the last place it had seen her, and it circled the ground where she had stood, and it faced down the slope toward the only light in all that dark country, my kitchen window, and it waited for her to come back up the trail. And she was not going to come back up the trail, and it did not understand that. It could not understand that. It only knew to wait in the one place, and I could not make it understand. And there is no worse feeling I have ever known than standing at a window listening to a child wait for someone you know is not coming and having no way in the world to tell it. I want to tell you it went on like that, the two of us, the tree and the food and the waiting, in some kind of peace. It did not stay peaceful because the world came in. Around the middle of December, a man from further down the valley, a decent enough man, stopped his truck at my gate to tell me to watch myself because there had been talk. A couple of the hunters had been finding odd, small tracks up the drainages, and somebody had seen something small and dark on a slope at dusk, and taken a shot at it and missed. And the word going around was that there was a young bear behaving strange, maybe sick, maybe rabid, and that a few of the men were of a mind to go find it and put it down before it came near anyone's kids or stock. He told me this as a kindness, so I would keep my eyes open. I thanked him for the kindness, and I went inside, and I was sick to my stomach because I knew exactly what small dark thing they meant to go find and put down, and I knew it was not sick, and I knew it was not a bear. And I knew that if I said one true word about what it actually was, I would only bring the whole valley up my trail with rifles and cameras and worse. That was the night I understood I could not just keep feeding it and waiting with it. The waiting was going to get it killed. Sooner or later, one of those men would follow the tracks up to my fur and find the little Sasquatch circling in the open, thin and slow and fixed on a spot in the snow. An easy shot, and that would be the end of it. Protecting it did not mean keeping it company anymore. It meant getting it to stop. It meant breaking the loop, getting it away from that tree and that trail and the light of my window that had become part of its waiting before the loop got it shot. I tried in the days after that to move it. I'm not proud of how clumsy it was, but I did not know any other way, and time was running out on us both. I tried leaving the food in a new place, further up the slope, toward the high country, a little further each evening, hoping I could draw the young Bigfoot up and away from the fur the way you lead any hungry thing, a trail of food toward somewhere safer. It would not follow it. It would come down to the fur, find the ring, circle it, and go hungry rather than leave the tree to eat. I tried going up in the afternoon and sitting between the little one and the tree, thinking if I put myself in the loop, I might break it. It only circled wider, going around me and the tree both, and the widening frightened me because it looked like the beginning of the thing coming apart. Nothing I did moved it. It was fixed on that spot the way grief fixes a person, and you cannot lead grief up a hill with a trail of apples. I know that now. I think I knew it then, and tried anyway, because the only thing worse than trying and failing would have been standing at my window doing nothing while the men came up the drainage. And the men were coming. I heard the shots twice that week, up the valley, far off, the flat crack of a rifle in cold air carrying for miles, and each time my heart stopped until the next midnight picture came in, and the little one was still there, still circling, still alive. But they were working the drainages. They were getting closer. It was only a matter of time before somebody thought to follow the small tracks all the way up, and the small tracks led, every one of them, straight to my fur. And I did not know how you tell a grieving child to stop waiting for its mother. I still do not. But I knew I had to try, and I knew that trying meant going up there to the tree at night when it came, and standing in the place its mother had stood, and I do not fully know to this day what I thought that would do. Maybe I thought if it saw a living thing stand in that place and not vanish, the spell of the empty spot would break. Maybe I just could not stand to let it wait one more night alone. I am not going to pretend I had a plan. I had a feeling that I could not leave it up there circling until the men came, and the feeling walked me up the trail. The winter deepened toward Christmas, and the little one got thinner and slower, and I got more afraid, not of it, for it. And finally there came a night, clear and hard and very cold, a full moon on the snow, so the whole slope was lit up blue when I could not stand it anymore. The food had gone untouched 2 mornings running. On the camera it was still coming, still circling, but slower, and it had started sitting down at the base of the tree between the circles, which frightened me more than anything, because a thing that sits down in that cold is a thing that is giving up. I put on everything I owned, and I went up the trail in the blue moonlight to the fur, and I stood in the trodden ring in the place I had worked out its mother must have stood. And I waited for it the way it had waited all winter for her. It came out of the timber above the tree a little after midnight. It saw me standing in the ring in the place, and it stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved on that whole white slope. It stood at the edge of the timber and looked at me standing where its mother should have been. And I looked at it, and I was crying, the tears freezing on my face, and I did not have one single word that would do any good, so I did not say any. I just stood in the place and let it see me. And it took a step toward me, and then another, closer than it had ever come, close enough that in the moonlight I could see the flat, dark eyes and the thin chest, and I swear to you, close enough to see that it understood I was not her, and had known from the first step, and had come anyway. And that is when they came out of the trees. Not the men, I want to be clear, because for one cold second I thought it was the men, and my heart went out of me. It was not the men. They came down through the timber above the fur, 3 of them, and they were huge, the full-grown kind, the kind on the Warden's camera, 7 feet and more, moving down the moonlit slope without a sound that anything that size has any right to move with. They came down around the little one, and they did not so much as glance at me, and I understood in that moment that I had been wrong about one thing all winter, wrong in the saddest possible way, and then at the very end, wrong in the best. I had thought the little one was alone. I had thought its whole family was gone with the mother, and it was the last of them, waiting by itself at the end of the world. It was not the last of them. They were out there the whole time. They had been searching all that long winter, across all that dark country, the same as the little one was waiting. And on that clear, cold night, for whatever reason, the 2 searches finally crossed at the one tree where it had never stopped coming back. One of them, the largest, came and stood over the little one and put a hand on it, a hand that could have covered its whole small back. And the little one made the sound then, the long, low-rising sound I had heard through the window. But different, not grief this time, and the big one answered it low in its chest, so I felt it in the ground through my boots. And then the largest one looked at me, straight at me, standing in the ring where the mother had stood, where I had left apples and bread and meat all winter for a child that was not mine. It looked at me for a long moment with those flat, dark eyes, and there was a notch in its left ear, an old healed split, and I did not know then what I know now about that notch, and I am glad I did not. It looked at me, and it did not come toward me, and it did not threaten me, and I have gone over that look 10,000 times in the years since trying to find the word for it, and the closest I've ever come is that it was letting me go, that it saw what I had done and understood it and was telling me in the only way it could that my part was over now, and that I was to turn around and go back down to my window and never come back up the trail and never speak of it, and let them take the little one home. So that is what I did. I turned around in the trodden ring under the fir, and I walked down the moonlit trail to my house, and I did not look back. And by morning the tracks up top were many instead of one, coming and going up the slope into the high country, and the small worn ring around the tree was scuffed over with big prints, and it never came back. There were no more midnight pictures. The camera caught deer and once a lynx, and the ordinary full world went on moving through my woods, and the little one was gone, home, wherever home was up in that country I was never meant to follow it to. I never told the men anything. When the fellow from down the valley asked weeks later whatever came of that strange young bear, I said I supposed it had moved on or died in the cold like sick things do. And he nodded, and that was the end of the talk, and no one ever went up my trail with a rifle, and that was the whole of the point. I kept it a secret because keeping it a secret was the last thing I could do for it, the only protection I had left to give, and I have kept it for years, and I am only breaking it now because of the saws. I want to tell you one more thing, and it is the thing that finally made me sit down and put all of this into words after keeping it shut inside me for so long. A few years after that winter, I saw a photograph. It was one of those blurry trail camera pictures that go around, the kind people argue about, a big, dark, upright shape at the edge of some far-off timber, and I very nearly clicked past it the way you do. But something in it caught me, and I went back and I looked for a long time, and on the left ear of the big Sasquatch in that faraway picture there was a notch, an old healed split in the ear. And I do not know, I cannot know, there is no way in this world for me to know if it was the same one, the big one that stood over the little one in the moonlight and looked at me and let me go. But I have thought about that notch every day since. I have thought that maybe the families of them range further than any of us guess, across all these valleys, all this dark country strung together, and that the big one with the torn ear is still out there somewhere, still moving through the timber at the edge of somebody's trail camera, carrying whatever it carries. And I have hoped, in a way I cannot defend and do not try to, that the little one is out there with it, grown now, no longer thin, no longer waiting at the foot of any tree. Home. Wherever home is up in that country, I was never meant to follow it to. Because here's the thing. That fir is still standing up at the top of my old trail, and the company that bought the parcel is going to cut that whole slope this spring, and they are going to take that tree down without knowing that it is the place a child waited a whole winter for its mother, and got instead its family and its way home. I do not own the land anymore, and I cannot stop them. But I could not let the saws reach that tree without one other person in the world knowing what it is, so that it is not, when it falls, only a tree. It was the most important place in the world for one long winter. Someone besides me should know. That is all of it. That is the thing I have carried the longest. I have told it as plainly and as truly as I know how. and I am not going to argue with anyone about whether it happened, because I was there in the ring in the moonlight, and you were not.
Real or fake, you decide. I was Alex, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.